Welcome back to the channel. We are here for the first time ever with my 1991 Mustang GT 5-liter 5-speed, otherwise known as the Ford which shall not be named. It has a name. I don't use it because it's kind of an arrogant name that this car will never be able to back up. So I think I've just rechristened it, that we just don't speak its name. Ford Voldemort. The purpose of today's video is to do a project introduction. I think everything on the channel that has 4 wheels, I've done one of these for. So the tractor has one, the Blazer has one, the Escort has one, the Jeep has one, and now the Mustang's gonna have one. And these are usually long, rambly videos where I discuss my history with the car and things I've done with it, what the vehicle is, and all that good stuff. So if you're here to actually see anything more interesting than listen to me ramble and like point at stuff, then you're at the wrong video. Also, if you stumble into this video at any point in the future beyond probably just a couple weeks, there will be a playlist for it, which I will link right up there as well as down in the description for you, so you can go check out all the Mustang 5-liter content. Also, if you hear some background noise, it's because it's 10,000 degrees in the shop and I've got a fan running behind me. Oh boy, so where to begin with this car? Well, the history of this car is almost as much a history of me. To a point anyway. Some of you may be surprised to learn that those of us who are into machines are not so much into people, or not so much into the concerns of other people, might be a different way to put it. So we'll say I was a non-traditional student through most of my way through school. If you are wondering, I did go to college. For those of you outside of the US, that would be university. I went through a technical program. I spent 6 years doing it. I picked up a couple pieces of paper that mean something to some people and nothing to others. None of that's really the scope of the channel, so we don't really discuss that too much. But the big point is that it took me until I was 27 years old to finish my education. So I made the first probably third of my life a lot harder on myself than I really needed to. If you are a channel regular, you will know that is a regular theme, that I will do things my own way, hell or high water, whether or not it made any sense, just because that's how I am. Sometimes it works out good, sometimes it works out bad, but it always works out. So, went through various struggles and all that crap, you know, through my teenage years like everyone does, through my 20s like everyone does, and as that was coming to an end, I had, through quite a lot of hard work on my end, quite a lot of determination, because another thing you probably noticed is I am not that smart. So anyone giving me a degree for anything was more tenacity than intelligence by far. So through gutting it out and a lot of different things, I ended up to save up enough money to buy my first real hobby car. This was not supposed to be it. I want to say my last year and a half of school, I was working 2 jobs, plus school was really hectic for me for the last couple years. I just put a whole bunch of really difficult courses on myself. At the time, I'd also had a girlfriend that looked like it was going to be serious and wasn't, but we spent a couple years pretending it would have been. So I had just a boatload of darts flying at a board all at the same time. But the one thing I had, which is unusual for most students, is money. So I was working a couple jobs. I still had some student debt and stuff, but when you're 26, 27 years old, you're not worried about that student debt you've got 10 or 15 years to pay off, or 20 or 30 if you refinance. You're worried about toys because you've, for the most part, probably lived a life without a lot of toys, most students anyway. So what this car was supposed to be was a 68, 9, or 70 AMC AMX. And I would still love to have an AMX. If you are feeling sorry for me and have one sitting around you want to get rid of cheap, let me know. I will give it a nice home. But what I discovered pretty quickly is that, one, not a lot of people really care for American Motors stuff. I am still an AMC guy. You guys have not seen it yet, but I own 2 American Motors vehicles that will eventually be on the channel. Unbelievably, you've only seen about half my vehicles, including this one. So since they're not very popular, not a lot of people preserve them to begin with. Second off, the first generation AMX is a pretty rare car to start with. I think total they built like 12,000 of them across all 3 years. And then kind of the triple whammy is being 50 years old, finding a decent one is pretty hard too. The ones you see now most of the time are either complete junk or have been restored beyond my budget. You'll find a few in between, but usually the people that did them think they're restored beyond my budget and price them that way, even though they're more toward junk. That's true of pretty much any classic car. And that's definitely true of these things as well. You will see these things as total nightmare boxes that have been rattle canned and people want $1 bajillion for them and blah, blah, blah. Oh, and I nearly forgot, I also had financing pre-approved for it. So I was gonna finance one if I found it at like 12% interest. So anyway, I went AMX shopping. In 18 months or so, I only managed to find one car to actually go look at, and it was a garbage box. And the guy that owned it thought it wasn't, and I think he wanted, in 2006 dollars, like 15 grand for it. The quarter panels were about 2 inches thick, so right back here you could just feel, and they were all made out of Bondo. The car didn't run right. It was a 394 speed car, which is what I wanted, but that was the only thing it had going for it. It needed the full treatment, and that was not what I was looking for. I was looking for something like this that was we'll say a weekend warrior, where I could get in it and drive it and enjoy it, and then just improve it in small ways as time went on. For the most part, that is what this car has been. But I was not shopping for this car. I was actually just out and about one day, driving the trek between my parents' house and my father's business, and this car was just out on the side of the road for sale. And actually, I think maybe a buddy of mine saw it first and called me, and I stopped and looked at it and saw everything you guys already know about it, that it's a 5-liter 5-speed, so critical, V8 and manual, must have. Pretty good condition, really. The car, the previous owner told me he drove it through one winter, and he was the second owner, so who knows what the first owner did with it. But the car has basically never had any rust on it, or very little. We'll talk about that more in a different video. So the car was very, very solid when I saw it. Interior is in pretty nice shape. It's gotten worse over time, but that happens. It had, I think, 78,000 miles on it at the time, and I bought it for $36.50. And this was the summer of 2006. And also, avid viewers, if you have noticed that a lot of things I have said on the channel, I'm like, well, this is 15 years ago. That's because that's when I got out of school. That's when a lot of these things all started to happen. For reasons we'll get into here in a minute, that's also when a lot of things started to stop. I think it was $36.50, $3,600 to $36.50. I've heard from people, over the approaching 20 years I've owned this car, that I was an idiot for paying that much for one. These days I wouldn't sell this car for less than 15 grand. If I had to continue to eat, that would be the price. Otherwise, it's not for sale. Car has 83,000 miles on it now, which is another sad story in its own right, that I've only driven it just that little in those many years. Really, I just drove the hell out of the car for about the first 3 years and then parked it. Nearly forgot, another thing I had going for it the day I bought it was 100% stock. This is still the only 5-liter I've ever seen in person with stock everything. Had the stock airbox, the stock air cleaner, the stock exhaust system, everything. The only thing that has been done to it is, at the time, I thought the sunroof in it was factory. It is not. It is an aftermarket sunroof. And frankly, if I'd have known that before I bought the car, I would not have bought the car, because I don't like cars with holes cut in them. The flip side of that is the factory headliner in this car is perfect, because the aftermarket sunroofs crush the headliners down together and hold them tight. The factory ones actually don't. So if it were a factory sunroof car, the headliner would have fallen out of it years ago. And frankly, if it had none, it would have probably fallen out years ago too. So as I've learned over the years, that's just a devil I'm gonna have to learn to live with. And I do believe it has been hit in this corner, and it just took out this fender. I did many years ago run a Carfax on it. It's around here somewhere. There's no reported accidents on it. But when we get to talking and I show you the stuff under the hood, that fender, you can see where the black paint is chipped up a little bit and there's red underneath it. So I believe that fender was originally red, and I believe this door has been painted to blend in that fender. Because when you get the car out in the sun, as time goes on, things fade. The sides of the car don't quite perfectly match, but for what I paid and for what the car is, it's completely fine. So I went from shopping for an AMX that morning, probably, or earlier that week or whatever. I'm sure I was scouring everything I could find to find one. Had buddies with feelers out and all that stuff. To a different pal calls me and says, hey, I just saw this car that you should go look at. And also, truth be told, I really don't like these cars. I've never much cared for the styling. It's just a boatload of fun for the amount of money I could pay. Ended up buying the car cash, didn't have to finance it. So within like a 4-hour time period, I had gone to look at the car, gone to the bank to get cash, I think before I even looked at it, drove it out to my buddy's house, put it up on jack stands, we crawled around underneath it. Car was super clean and had just started to have like little bits of surface rust starting at all the seams. And that was it. Oh, and it sounded really good for reasons that we didn't understand with it being a stock exhaust. The reason it sounded really good, I came to find out the following summer, is because the factory exhaust had actually broken away from the muffler and we just missed it when we were looking, because it hadn't really swung out of the way a whole lot yet. And when I did the exhaust on it, I ground down all the seams, ground all the rust out of them, primed the entire underbody of the car from about there all the way back to the gas tank. So basically, just above the rear axle I stopped, so I still need to pull the tank out of it someday and finish that. And I have done a whole bunch of other things along the way. In the description, I will actually copy and paste a complete list of stuff that's been done to this car, because there's kind of too much, but I'll hit the high notes. It has prothane, polyurethane engine mounts, and transmission mounts. The transmission crossmember mounts are billet aluminum. They would have been rubber suspended from the factory, so the whole drivetrain in this car is very tight now. The factory motor mounts in these things are garbage. 78,000 miles, the factory ones were worn out. So I put the Prothane stuff in it. It has a complete stainless exhaust system on it. It's also the cheapest stainless exhaust, and it is truly the definition of stainless. It's stainless, not stain-free. So the headers, it's got shorty headers on it, are 304 stainless, so they were polished, but the cars had them for 15 years, so they're a little surface rusty now, and they were just generic, basically eBay headers. It has a Pipes the Beast performance exhaust on it, so it's been cat deleted. It has an off-road X pipe, basically straight through like turbo / boreless style mufflers. The system has never fit the car very well, but it was 400 bucks. And I was, just out of college. You're still broke even if you do stuff like this. So basically every year I would get a tax return that was $600 or $700, and I would put it into this car for 2 or 3 years there, the good old days. So I did all that one spring, and then maintenance stuff. I've had to do the heater core in it. That was actually one of the first jobs I had to do in the car when I bought it. The brakes were all garbage. The heater core was garbage. That happened as soon as I got it put back together. And the suspension was garbage. These cars love to squat down in the rear. And this one might be just a touch squatty now. That's because it's got a trunk full of subs, but it's not nearly as bad as it was when I bought it. It's also on Ford Racing B springs, so it's been dropped about an inch, like 3/4 of an inch or an inch. It doesn't look like it's been lowered. You could tell an immediate difference in the car, the way it drives, that yes, it's been lowered. And you can tell an immediate difference when you come up to a speed bump or something. Also, this car will not go in and out of this driveway with ramps. So in the approaching 4 years I have lived here, it has never left the property. There are other reasons for that as well. When I did all the suspension work, I also put cross-rolled rotors on the front of it, freed up all the brakes, all that stuff. The rotors on the front of it were just Summit brand ones, and they are hot garbage. So they need replaced. They warp almost instantly. The tires on the car when I bought it were completely roasted. So these are used tires that I put on it then that are date coded 2002. They were in basically perfect condition when I got them. I've managed to burn about half of the rears off. And then obviously now that they're 19 years old, we ain't going nowhere on them. Plus they have been ridiculously flat spotted over the years because for, it's a sadly long amount of time. I think 11 years this car sat literally in the same spot. I didn't even pull it out of the garage. We'll get into why. So I've done a handful of things to the car. Again, down in the description, you can read through them all. Some of them fun, some of them maintenance. Overall, I've made it a pretty decent car. It offlined itself because the suspension is too dangerous to drive. The front struts are just completely blown. It's a $200 fix with a $100 alignment, but I have a whole bunch of other parts for the car. And frankly, I'm kind of glad the car did get parked because I probably would have gone a lot more crazy with this car than the car truly deserves. This car is not rare in the fact that there's a million Fox bodies out there. This car is rare in the fact that it is mostly an original car in mostly original condition, and it is not a complete pile of garbage. This is what I would refer to as a driver quality car. So it's a survivor quality car in nice driving condition for the most part. Needs some work, but the body and everything's really nice. The interior is pretty nice. It's a car you could get in and legitimately daily drive, in fair weather every single day if you wanted to. And you didn't have to spend 50 grand to have it restored. So in that sense, it's pretty rare. Now that I'm a man of significantly more years, I've realized if I want one to go really fast, I'm gonna buy one somebody else has already cut up first. I'll just go buy a race car if I want a race car. There's a handful of racy things to this one I'm going to do because they just make it a better car. These things have notoriously flexible chassis, so it's getting a set of subframe connectors that I've had for like 15 years. They're also known for ripping the suspension mounts out of the body in the rear, and they make what are called battle boxes, which are weld-in reinforcements for that area so you don't rip the suspension arms out when you launch the car. I should also say, I'm not gonna make this a 600 horsepower fire-breathing monster, but 300 and drive it like a jerk? Almost absolutely is gonna happen. Disappointingly, this car has been on a dyno with the exhaust work done, with the mechanical fan deleted. It's got an E-fan on it. Again, when we get under the hood, we'll talk about some of this stuff. Air pump's been deleted, just a few things. I haven't put an underdrive set of pulleys on it or anything, but this piece of garbage made 199 horsepower on a dyno jet. It wouldn't even crack 200 horsepower. From the factory, they were rated at 225. So I've done things to free up power, and it turned in pretty much stock power. That's about a 10% loss through a manual transmission, which is about right. So I was kind of disappointed in that. I didn't think about it until after the fact, but I've also never done like an actual tune-up on this car. I think I put plugs in it when I got it, but I've never pulled the distributor cap. I've never pulled the rotor. I've never checked the timing. To my shame, I actually don't even even own a timing light, so I know bumping up the timing on it will help it out. I've also opened up the intake path on the motor, the airbox silencer. So there's like a big plastic thing that goes over in the fender that quiets the intake air. Well, it also restricts the intake air. That thing's gone. I put a larger mass airflow sensor housing on it from an SN95 Mustang, so the next generation after this. So I've opened up the exhaust, I've opened up the intake, I've freed up mechanical load, and it provided me 0 more horsepower on paper. I never had the car dynoed when it was dead stock. I kind of wish I would have, so I would have known if I made any difference or not. But basically, I put $1,500 of speed parts on this thing, got nothing out of them. But I did pave the way for some future stuff that is still going to happen. I have a set of 95 Cobra cylinder heads that came off of an actual 95 Cobra, so they're not the, I think, what, P heads or whatever, so the spark plug angle is correct for Mustangs and all that crap. So they will appear stock. I also have a Ford Racing aftermarket Mustang Cobra manifold setup for it. So it's the GT40 manifold and GT40 cylinder heads. The manifold is the aftermarket Ford Racing part, so it's not the cool 93 Cobra tubular stuff. It's the cast one. It was allegedly extrude honed, which if you've never heard of that, that's a process where they take sand and basically mix it with Play-Doh and then shoot it with pressure through openings to both open it up and to smooth out the surfaces. I've seen no actual evidence that was actually done. So that would be the upper manifold. The lower manifold is conventional like most any other vehicle, and the lower was supposed to have been ported. It was not, guaranteed. Is now. The GT40 heads and the lower intake manifold went off to a buddy of mine who ported and polished the heads and ported the lower intake and gasket matched them to a Felpro gasket set I wish I could remember, and I hope I have in my email somewhere from 15 years ago. In retrospect, this all cost me way more money than it was worth, and I should have bought aluminum heads and stuff. At the time, aluminum heads had been on cars for a while, but not as prevalently as they are today. And a lot of vehicles back then were known for dropping valve seats with an aluminum head. So you'd have a steel valve seat into the aluminum head, and the aluminum head would expand and contract at different rates from the steel, and the seats would get loose, and eventually it would drop out into the cylinder and destroy the motor. And my original vision of this car was I wanted to be able to get in it and drive it from coast to coast. Literally what I wanted to do was take this car down Route 66, do the whole country. So that was a goal. It's maybe still a stretch goal, but it probably won't be in this car for a whole lot of reasons. So anyway, I wanted as many factory parts on it as I could get so I could pull into any AutoZone or Advanced Auto or whatever and get anything I needed. Now, you're probably not going to get a cylinder head, but if I were out in the middle of nowhere, Utah, I would still probably rather try and come up with a GT40P head out of a junkyard than I would try and come up with an AFR head of this particular displacement, whatever, overnight, something like that. But the truth of the matter is time has marched on far enough that parts for these cars aren't that easy to find anymore anyway. I also have a complete SN95 spindle kit for it because I wanted to put like 95 Cobra disc brakes on it. Those components are now getting difficult to find. So I think it may actually be worth the effort to put like Willwoods or Bayer brakes, like an actual aftermarket kit on it now. Because I think the aftermarket will support it better than the Ford parts coming into the next 20 years of my life. So all this stuff snowballed. And I kept stacking all these parts up and accumulating things and spending what little money I could spend, getting those heads ported and all that stuff. That was like, a year of the budget for this car. I couldn't afford to buy gaskets. So got the cylinder heads and all that stuff back, and that was what I spent on the car that year. And they're still in storage to this day. I'm wondering if they're not just solid rust because it's been like 14 years since I actually looked at them. So anyway, the original plan here was to drop the K-frame, the motor, the transmission, everything out of the bottom of this car because I had planned to have a lift by now as well, and do all the engine work on it, rebuild all the suspension, probably put a tubular K-frame in it, do all the Cobra brake stuff, tubular A-arms, all that crap, and then ship it. And then the next part of that plan was probably going to be a Pro Charger, and almost certainly multiple transmissions along the way because T5's pretty much glass transmission. I will say I learned how to drive stick on a S10 with a T5 in it, and I still just love the feel of them. They feel like nothing, and it's just fun to just click, click, click through the gears. It just brings me right back to the first time I ever drove a stick by myself. I have 2 vehicles with T5s in them right now, and I'm trying to decide which one's going to keep it. Or if somebody knows if like a TKO 600 preserves that exact same feeling, let me know in the comments, because I'm more interested in keeping the feeling of the car the way it should be than I am the durability. So if I blow up a transmission every summer, I would almost rather do that than ruin the feel of the car. Or maybe the easy thing to do would just be find somebody with a TKO and I'll go drive it for 5 miles and make a decision. But anyway, that was the plan. And now that 15 years have passed, like I said, cooler heads have prevailed. It is still going to get the Cobra goodies because that stuff even with the port work and everything, and I'm almost certainly going to put it on standalone fuel injection. So the A9L Ford ECM will be out of there, and it'll probably be run on a Mega Squirt. So then I can tune it. Even with all that stuff done, I'd be surprised if this car makes 300 wheel. If it did, I think I would be pretty happy because truthfully, another car that I just adore and would really like to own in the not too distant future is C5 Corvettes. You can get a nice C5 for like 15 grand, and a C5 Corvette will wreck one of these things hard in anything but pretty much rotted out style. So if I'm going to spend the amount of money to turn this car into something it really isn't, I'll just go buy a C5 or maybe a C6 or maybe an AMX, or maybe do none of those things. We'll see. So this thing has always been the dreamer machine, and it's the machine of uncaptured dreams. I wasn't dreaming of this car when I bought it. For the last 15 years, I haven't been able to dream about it at all, just various reasons. We'll talk about those in a second. I have big plans for it that I've scaled down. So I, one, don't ruin the car, and two, can actually drive the car instead of just look at it. So there's a lot of my life wrapped up in this thing, and a lot of my story comes with it. It took a lot of years to be able to buy this car, not because I love this car so much or because it was so expensive, but because I am such a dumbass. So it took me, basically the first 30 years of my life to afford the first car that I actually wanted. Everything else I ended up with because it was, a good deal, or it was as close as I could get, or anything else. This one, the only reason I bought it was to have fun. And brothers and sisters, I have had fun with it. One thing about these cars is that in stock configuration, they are basically perfectly balanced. I don't mean that in weight distribution, although I think they're not that awful. I mean that in terms of capability. These cars get criticized all the time for having crappy brakes. The brakes are okay if in stock form, if you're not an idiot trying to drive it at 140. Transmissions hold up plenty fine, although I think this one has already had a transmission replacement. There's a tag on the side of the transmission with an 800 number on it, and the last time I tried to look up the number, I couldn't find what it went to, but I'm sure it was a transmission rebuilding shop of some kind. They have awful rear gears from the factory. They're 273s, but this thing goes down the highway at 70 and gets like 26 miles per gallon, 25 miles per gallon. It's something crazy like that. And I want to say in stock form, without trying to drive every single inch of life out of it, and without trying to say that I'm John Force, or that every Mustang 5-liter driver is John Force and can drive a car perfectly through the quarter mile. This is a mid to high 14-second quarter mile car. In 1991, that was basically a space shuttle. This was, we'll just say, one of the top 5 hottest vehicles that a normal person could have afforded to buy brand new in 1991. So this thing would have been very fast by like 80s and 90s standards, and you can do a few simple things with them to turn the wick up quite a bit, like get the crap 273 gears out of it and put 373s or 411s in it, which is what I'm going to do. It'll end up with a set of 373s eventually, probably 373s. And some basic suspension work. You can turn the timing on the engine up a little bit and just run premium. So basically with just a weekend and maybe $1,000 and some tools and a little bit of skill, you can drop one of these things down into the mid-13s with an average driver. I know there are guys out there like Uncle Tony's Garage. Apparently he was a big 5-liter guy, like back when these cars were new. I would have been a child back then. I wouldn't have had any clue what he was doing. But he and his pals were saying they were running these things down like 13.0 or like high 12s in stock condition, but they were just beating the tar out of them to do that. I can believe it, but I wouldn't want to do that to mine. Theirs were also all LXs, which are just a little bit lighter. Surprisingly, they're not all that much lighter. It's like 150 pounds. People think it's a big deal. It isn't. The big weight loss on them is when you ditch the hatchback and go to a coupe. Those known as notchbacks are, I think, like 300 pounds lighter than a GT hatch. So this is not the fastest car in the world when it was new, but it was a really fun car. It's still a really fun car today. 14.5 second quarter mile sounds like you're walking. Pretty sure like a Honda with Accord with a V6 is probably faster than that, but there's no way it's more fun than that. This car will light up the rear tires all the way through first gear, pretty much as long as you want to hold the pedal down. You bang second and it'll bark loose and slide sideways about a foot and just be a complete jerk with it, and you're going like maybe 50? No, probably not even that fast. I think 50 is like the top of second. It's been quite a while since I've driven the car, but yeah, so you can, this is like the 10/10ths thing, or I'll call it 8/10ths. You can drive a slow car faster than you can drive a fast car slow, or it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than it is a fast car slow. So driving this car at like 8/10ths is quite a lot of fun. Guys get into trouble with these when they try and push for 10/10ths. The suspension on them is not that good, in my opinion. For like corner carving, which is some of the stuff I've tried to do with this car, is drive it kind of aggressively. What I found is the front end just pushes if you go into turn too fast, which is way more scary than the rear end coming out. So a lot of guys put these things in ditches and everything else. I mean, the memes are out there everywhere, right? These things chasing after crowds. Normally when you see that, it's guys swinging them out trying to be cool. They're actually pretty good at that. They're not pretty good at it when it's a 400 horsepower car, which a lot of them that you see on the internet like that do have the wicks turned up significantly, with probably a low-tech suspension setup and a low-tech driver behind the wheel. I'm for sure not a high-tech driver either. When I bought this car, I think I said earlier, the rear tires were just 100% bald. And it made it the most fun car on the planet to drive, but like the most dangerous thing ever. And I think the first week I had it, I was trying to show off pulling out of work, and I 180'd it in the parking lot trying to turn out into work with a dude right behind me that I worked with. And yes, I heard about that, and yes, I absolutely deserved it. These cars will come out on you, but you're going to be trying to do it. Oh yes, that's the point in the video where I remember I was trying to make a point. Balance. The balance of these cars is pretty good out of the factory, but if you start affecting one thing or the other more than just a little bit, like if you start putting a lot of horsepower on one, you're going to start breaking transmissions, you're going to start burning through clutches. If you set one up to go fast enough, the brakes become inadequate. From stock, they're not so bad, but once you start tinkering with that formula, it escalates out of hand quickly. And I'm balancing somewhere in that realm now with some of my plans, but my plans before were full on affect the balance badly and see what happens. These days I would just like to improve the car in, I suppose, smaller increments. So what has sidelined the car for, gosh, like 15 years at this point. Last time I drove this car, it was literally to a storage facility with no plates. Did have insurance. It was like a 2-mile drive, and it was to put it there while I moved into this house. And that was it. It got trailered to where you see it now. It sat in one spot at my previous residence for, I bet it was 9 or 10 straight years without running. So I wish I was doing YouTube then, because this would have literally been like a barn find Mustang. I had to do all the stuff to one that you would have done then, and it looked the part. If you have seen any of my other videos and you thought the car was dirty, you should have seen it then. So at that time, I put new fuel filter on it, pumped all the old gas out of it, changed the motor oil. All the other fluids in the car have been done a long time ago. They should be done again though. Check the air intake, make sure all that was clean, all that stuff. Put fresh gas in it, put a battery in it, and unbelievably it fired right off like I just touched it yesterday. I did check and make sure the motor wasn't locked up. Ideally, I probably should have pulled the plugs and put some oil down the cylinders and all that crap, but it was time to move. I had stuff going on. It wasn't Mustang restoration day. It was Mustang needs to leave this property so I can sell this house day. And plus, when I moved from that house, I moved and took a job immediately out of town. So the car was sitting in a detached garage that had essentially no security, unattended, in what was a way more sketchy neighborhood than I thought it was when I bought the house. So I wanted it out of there immediately. So I did the bare minimum I had to get the car to the storage place. It sat there until the spring, so that was like a few days before Christmas 2017. Spring 2018, I went and got the car. Here it sits. I've been much better about the maintenance of it since it's been here. It gets started and warmed up at least every 6 months. I change the fuel out of it at least every 6 months, all that good stuff. But what has sidelined the car are a combination of things. One, bought a bad house. Did not realize it when I did it. By the time I found out, it was basically all over and I was screwed. Ended up having a bad job, which I also did not know when I took the job. Ended up making a bunch of money, but it stressed me out to the point that I have permanent health problems because of it to this day. But nothing good was happening with the money. I was basically always behind on money. I was always trying to save up money to get things fixed on the house. And I was also trying to pay the mortgage down on the house as fast as I could because I did the other dumb thing that young people do when they buy houses, and put like $0 down. I put like $1,500 down on a house. It was only a $100,000 house. This is December 2009 pricing, so this was just right after everything crashed, so house prices were okay. They actually ended up getting a lot cheaper before they ever came back up to that. Different story, when I sold the house, I lost money on it, even at 100 grand, 10 plus years later. So anyway, bad house, bad job that affected my health and my money. As part of that, wrong woman, that's something that's been going on for a while. It's been over for a while, but it still is haunting me. So I was busy trying to balance these things. I was busy trying to balance an awful house, a bad job that was literally making me sick, a woman who I was in a bad situation with that ultimately it never did get better, and wasted 14 years of my life, at least 12 for sure. The other 2 we can debate. If you've ever wanted to know, the name of the channel is a double entendre. It's not just all my stuff that's broken. But throughout all that crap, the car sat. I had too much other stuff to worry about. At the same time, I had issues with my daily drivers, the stuff you've seen on the channel already. I bought this car a few months after I bought the Jeep. I was still making payments on the Jeep. So again, wise financial planning. I paid cash for this one, was making payments on the one I bought to drive. A few S10s came and went during that time too as drivers. A couple Escorts came and went. You guys can check out the story of that car if you want. There's an Escort playlist, of course, so I'll throw it right up there for you. So all these different things were happening and this car just sat and it sat and it sat because it didn't have to go anywhere, so it didn't. Right now it's straight up just too dangerous to drive the way the front suspension is. Oh yeah, and the rear axle howls like mad. The pinion seal on it was bad when I bought it. I have no idea how long it was run low on fluid or anything else. I put new seal in it, but when I did it, you have to establish a preload on those bearings and you kind of only get one chance at it without taking everything back apart. So there's a crush collar in there and I wasn't about to rebuild a rear end with 273 gears, also with no budget. So I bought the $12 seal, put it in, ran down the pinion nut to what was tight enough with some Loctite on it and staked it, and it's howled ever since then, so it's on its way out, but I also don't care. So I have an army of parts for this car, including a whole nother rear axle, because I hate doing this stuff under the car, so I would put it up on the bench to re-gear it. Actually, I don't live all that far from Mosier Engineering. They are down in Portland, Indiana. I am up in Elkhart County. For years and years, I just planned to take it down to Mosier and let them do cool things to it. Not sure if that would still be a plan or not, but that was the plan then. Here's the big long rambletron of the story of the car. But basically this car, much like me, is kind of missing 10 years of its life to issues mostly beyond its control. Mostly externalities have caused it and me to not make progress when we definitely should have been. As far as the me side of that, there are definitely things I could have done better, should have done better, that would have made things better, but this car would have still just been sitting. It's always been a hobby car. This car's just flat out not fun to drive if the weather isn't good. I mean, you can definitely drive it in the rain, but why would you? You can't bang gears. That you will end up in a ditch if you try and bang gears in it in the rain. There's no ABS, there's no traction control, there's none of that crap. There's 300 foot-pounds of torque and a clutch. So that's plenty to do dumb things with if you want. So I just always just haven't driven it in bad weather. I have driven it in the winter literally one day. That was also to move. So it got driven on like a dusting of snow once. It's never seen salt in the 17 years I've owned it. It's always been stored inside the whole time I've owned it. Never climate controlled though. This garage is like kind of climate controlled. It gets super hot in here a few days a year and then gets super cold a few days a year. Most of the time it stays in between. So most of the time for the last 4 years, the car has been probably 35F up to 95F in that range. Normally not over 100, normally not under freezing. It does have some other deferred maintenance. It's got a power steering leak now, a radiator hose leak, stuff like that. Just little things, but nothing real major. It's still a nice, honest car. The reason it's on the channel right now is because I am going to start doing some work to it. In fact, as I'm recording this, like a really small amount of work has been done on it. Mostly just like preservation kind of stuff. The car's not perfect, but I don't want it to get any worse. And I'm hoping that like the next phase of my life, the next chapter in the book, so we'll say over the next 2 or 3 years, is truly a new chapter. A lot of those bad things from the past are now gone. The house has long been gone. I should have got rid of that house 6 months after I bought it. If I were a more intelligent guy, that's what would have happened. I would have been right in and out of it, but instead I lived there for, I think, 12 years. Bad job has been gone, been replaced by a couple of other bad jobs. I'm struggling and finding different ways to deal with that crap. Mostly what I'm finding right now is just different ways to make money. I'm coming now to the conclusion that my career is being outsourced, not just in the industry I am in, but basically every industry, because it's just what people seem to think is the right thing to do, despite, I think, a lot of evidence that most of us have seen that outsourcing doesn't yield a better result, it just yields a cheaper one. I have been thinking that for like 10 years, and for the most part, I still manage to find work every time I need a job. There's some stories to be told there, but it keeps happening, so it is what it is. As far as like YouTube, it'll be 10 years before YouTube could even be close to a replacement for a day job for me. This will always be a hobby. It'll always be kind of a bonus thing. Truth be told, and I'll just let that cat out of the bag, I've been pretty straightforward with you guys about the channel being a business. It is for profit. I don't do this just for fun. The goal of the channel is to be able to support a shop. The mortgage payment on $100,000 at like 5 or 6% interest is like $700. If this channel could support the projects on it, so if it could pay for the parts for the vehicles, because I still don't always have $1,000 to throw at the car or whatever, and pay a mortgage payment for a shop on property I already own, that would be just freaking fantastic. So that is like call it the 5-year goal, and I think that's attainable. I think from what I'm seeing now, we could probably get there. I've said to other people before that it really doesn't take a whole lot to make a big difference as far as additional income that is completely secondary to you. If you've established your budget around the money you make from this pile of money, and then you go pick up another job and make this pile of money, and you don't alter your budget, you now have this pile of money. Where I'm at with YouTube right now is that it actually costs me money. So I don't make anywhere near enough on YouTube to support the projects that you see on the channel. We'll get there. All these things will pan out. The car for sure, now that I've kind of altered my perceptions of the things I'm gonna do with it, the car for sure can be back on the road just about any time I want. It just isn't gonna be any fun to do it here because I can't drive it. I've got a set of race ramps, like the 2-inch tall ones in the back seat. So if this house were ever on fire or something like that, I could actually get it off the property and get it out of the driveway. But can you imagine, you know, getting up and trying to drive to work in the morning and putting a set of ramps down to get out of your friggin' driveway, and then get out of the car and pick up your ramps and then drive to work, and oh, there's a speed bump, and get out your ramp. This car isn't that low, but the speed bumps and all that crap have just seemingly gotten out of hand in about the last 5 to 10 years. Even if this thing were going, I still wouldn't drive it because it's just not any fun to do that where I live now. Let's actually go take a better look at some of the stuff on this thing. There's some stuff under the hood I haven't talked about yet that some of you might find interesting. We'll take a look at the interior. The interior on the car is actually pretty nice. Welcome to the interior. First thing aficionados are going to notice right away is I said this car is a 91, and that is not a 91 steering wheel. I think 90 was the first year for airbags. I think 91 was the first year for pony wheels, which this car does have pony wheels. So this car came with an airbag steering wheel, and Ford in this generation, you either got an airbag or tilt wheel. Their tilt wheel column was too fragile to handle an airbag. So me, being a big guy, I'm both tall and fat, wanted tilt wheel. Also me, not knowing anything about Fox bodies, I just bought a tilt wheel on eBay and swapped it out. I've read assorted things over the years that it was supposed to be harder than it was for me. Maybe I got lucky in some way. Like my dash bezel and stuff actually fits pretty well. But what I did not know is that tilt wheel in these cars is literally tilt wheel. It is not tilt column, which it is on every other car I've ever seen. So tilt wheel just tilts the wheel. It's basically completely useless. It does almost the opposite of what I needed. The one problem I have is when the left turn signal is on, my foot's on the clutch. If I bring my foot up to roll forward, I cancel the signal, which is really annoying. Yeah, that's what the wheel does. So the column does not go with it. It does make the car mildly easier to get in and out of, but not really enough to deal with it or to be worth it. I'm not sure if this gap here is completely correct or whatever, but the installation of it turned out pretty well. I do still have all the original parts for this car. Like all the parts, I have the Factory X pipe for it too, with the cats and all that crap. But all in all, it's a pretty honest, decent interior. Sadly, just due to time, I just opened the door on the car one day and noticed that had a crack in it right there. It just dried out, I guess. And then I was just noticing, like right as I opened the door, this plastic piece, I don't know if it's supposed to wrap around. It looks like it probably did. Looks like it also punched a hole in the seat. Just because of time. You'll also have to forgive me, my image might be a little bit washed out. This car does not have a functioning dome light, has no battery in it because it likes to eat batteries. That will be a topic of a future video. Could be the battery, it could be me, or maybe a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. But all in all, the interior in this car is in really nice shape. Down here, we have a somewhat aborted project, or at least a project in waiting. That's actually the first car audio speaker I ever bought. That's a 6.5-inch Sirwin Vega component that's supposed to have a tweeter that goes with it, which is not in the car. And these things have door pockets that go here. The one on the passenger side is still there. So I think you can see it. And they always look dumb because the elastic fails, so they sag, and they're useless anyway. I'm not gonna put like a pack of cigarettes or a pack of gum or something in my door pocket. It's useless. So what I wanted to do, and I'm still going to end up doing, is just building a replacement blank for that with a speaker pod in it so I can mount a deeper speaker in the door, because that 6.5 just barely fits. These cars are notorious for having really thin doors as far as speaker fitment. I've also actually trimmed about 1 inch or 2 off the window track up there. I think you can see the front edge of the glass runs right past the speaker. So I just trimmed just the little bottom portion of the window track. It doesn't hurt anything at all. It's still got like 10 inches of track, but it did help that speaker clear. And then presently there's just a plywood ring and they're spacing it out. So this is all a project for a different day. I guess while we're talking about it, this is the back seat of the car. Those are my race ramps. So yeah, we never leave home without those. I'm glad they exist though. But back here we have An Audio Art 50HC. Audio Art makes terrible amplifiers. Whatever you do, don't get on eBay and scour the earth for the HC series Audio Art, especially not a 100HC, because I would like to buy one and you don't need to compete with me. I've owned that amplifier since I think like 2003. It has been fantastic, but you should totally never buy one. Don't compete with me on eBay. What you're looking at there is the Saturday night special of car audio installation. It's that amp. I know you're not supposed to do this, but you know, again, I was young and out of money, which the out of money is still true. That amp's bolted to a 12-inch speaker box I got for free, and then put a pair of $99 Audiobahn 12s in it. So the pair of them was 99 bucks. Super fun. If that's not your cup of tea, that's okay. Do trust that, like everything else I do on the channel, I try and be a good ambassador of what I'm doing. And car audio is going to be a thing on this channel. You can skip those videos if you want, but it's going to be a thing. So yep, thing's got a pair of 12s. There are some like kind of inexpensive Polk Audio rears in it that I just put in because I got a deal on them used. Stuff like that. As a giant alternator I built that is giving me grief probably, again, subject of a different video. It has what is now a hilariously outdated Sony head unit with iPod control, but this thing is so old the iPod control module is actually a separate accessory, so it's under the passenger seat. I have to plug my iPod in the back seat. Too bad, because I really love this deck. This deck may stay in the car, especially since the days of iPods are over. I do actually have, because for quite a while I was a Sony head unit guy. I've since moved on to Pioneers, but this Sony in particular I really enjoy. I do have an auxiliary input box that works for this family of Sonys, I think. So anything that would have a changer control or an iPod controller, they should be able to plug a Bluetooth module into. So maybe we'll do something like that someday. But basically that's, you know, the system in this car. Oh, and there are like some really cheap JBL 3.5-inch speakers in the dash just because they were cheap and I put them there. It's loud. I wouldn't say it sounds good, but so mission accomplished. And I suppose the final crown jewel of the interior is another of the things that was just completely wrong with this car when I got it, and I didn't know until later, is it had previously had an alarm in it, and it must have been so long ago that alarms were expensive because someone actually cut it back out, and then wire extensions and butt connectored and flying spliced and all that crap, the whole column harness back together and everything else. And my thought was, well, if I'm going to go through all the trouble to fix all this crap, there's already a hole in the dash for the LED, which is right there, I may as well just put an alarm back in it. So I did. I'm kind of indifferent for whether or not that was a wise thing to do. I never did mount the siren because it's still a 2005 era alarm, so it false alarmed all the time. Even sitting in the garage, it would false alarm. You know, the lights would start flashing and all that crap. What it is nice for is keyless entry. That's handy. What I may do is at some point update it with a modern alarm that isn't a big pile of crap. But for right now, it's just nice that it has keyless entry and like the headlight sentinel and crap like that. Basically, it made it like a late 90s car instead of an early 90s car. So you hit the unlock button, the headlights come on and flash and all that crap. But that is about the end of the interior stuff. Basically, I put a ghetto system in it of stuff I either already had or could get really cheap because I was broke when I did it. This car actually has the first wiring kit I ever bought in it. I bought a wiring kit in 1995 that is still in use right now. So let that be a lesson to you boys and girls. Buy high quality copper wire because it'll live on. So yeah, let's go check out under the hood. So here we are under the hood. Things that should stand out to people that know these cars is one, that's an aluminum radiator. That's a fluid dyne radiator, which at the time I bought it was like one of the best budget options you can get. It was under $300, I think. It wasn't too bad. Basically fit right in the car. That is what is called a 3G alternator. So there are specific years of Ford products that use an alternator that almost directly bolts up to this bracket system. From the factory, these cars had like a 80 amp alternator, and they also had a terrible connector system for the charging wire. These cars burned down because of that awful connector, and it had a sissy little alternator on it. And as you know, I want me some bump in this car, so that wasn't gonna work. So I got that 3G alternator, which should have been, I think, 130 amps versus the stock, like we'll say 80. And then I built that one up to police spec with a heavy duty stator and brush kit and all that crap. So that one should be about 200. I'm not sure if it's overcharging and killing batteries or if I've run into a batch of bad batteries. Don't know. The car spent so much time sitting, it's really hard to say. But throughout the process of going through all that stuff, all of that has been powder coated. I absolutely hate the look of oxidized aluminum. I also think that like painting aluminum is kind of cheesy, in my opinion. Don't let me stop you from your dreams. But the place I worked at the time had a powder coat line, and they let anybody powder coat anything within reason. Basically, if you bought the line pizza. It's also one of those deals where the line was run by a woman who was challenging, we'll say. You know, she's one of those people where you had to earn her respect. If you didn't, she could be a handful, and if you did, you were buddies, and we ended up being buddies. So I had a fair few things powder coated while I was there. Air conditioner bracket's been powder coated, tensioner's been powder coated, alternator case was powder coated. That was a nightmare, by the way, because I had to grind all the powder coating out of the inside of it to get the coil and stuff back in it. The whole bracket spin-on's been powder coated, and the powder coat on this is basically almost a dead perfect match for wheel paint. Yeah, like I said, painted aluminum's cheesy, and then I went ahead and did that anyway. I'm into the Wayback Machine inside my mind now, but I believe the bracket for the power steering pump was powder coated, but the pump itself I painted because I can't send an assembled pump through a powder oven. But basically it's the same finish as the wheels on this car, so it's a metallic gray with a little bit of metal flake in it. It looked better by mid-2000s standards. It's kind of like a tribal tattoo now, but I think I'm just going to run with it. And in fact, I like this combo enough. I think this is going to be like Max's engine treatment. We're just going to go with wheel paint and make everything else black, because silver on black is, even though a little tacky because of the sparkle in it, I think fairly timeless. I believe these cars would have had a black block from the factory. This one's rust colored now. Of course it is, because it's a 30-year-old car. But anyway, the whole plan here was eventually the valve covers would match. That upper intake's going to go away. You can see how long those runners are in it. That's what I was talking about with this extrude honing earlier, where they push stuff through them. But that manifold will be out of there, replaced with the Cobra manifold. Those struts are what's making the car too dangerous to drive. I would like to get the AC retrofit and working. For like the first 2 years I had the car, the AC actually still worked, and it has stopped. Probably the thing I'm the most proud of under the hood of this car, has let me down the most, and it's the first thing that's going to leave, which is too bad. So I put just a boatload of work into it. And that is my electric fan swap. That is a Lincoln Mark 8 electric fan. That was supposed to be like the highest performance option you could get. The thing was supposed to flow more than aftermarket fans of the period. So in like 2008, that was supposed to be better than like Spal fans and stuff. And now that's totally not true. There are brushless fans that are just crazy huge, or crazy nasty. But why it was so much work, and I will insert pictures of this because I'm still proud even if it was dumb, is there were the like mounting ribs and crap all over this thing. Sadly, this has been painted, by the way. This just etched recently when I washed it, which is too bad, because before that the paint on that thing was almost like a mirror. But I fully bodyworked that and painted it and hand polished it and all that crap. I took all those ridges off. I also took an inch out of the depth to get it to fit, which it just barely does. I had to put button heads in the water pump pulley, and they've actually hit the motor on the fan anyway. And the fan motor has like little ventilation ducts on the back of it. Actually, I had to cut one of those off for clearance. It's just not going to work. It does a pretty much fine job with the car going down the street. I do have a Flexolite fan controller bolted down to that fender over there, which is fully adjustable, and it will run after the car is shut off too. I think it runs for like 30 seconds just to push underheat air out. And it seems to be an okay piece. The fan just really doesn't seem like it's moving that much air. Truth is, it works fine, but I just don't like how it packages either. Depending on how things turn out, once the heads and intake and stuff are all done on it, this thing could still end up with a power adder. I'm just not gonna go for like Boss 302 block, 800 horsepower or whatever to the moon. I do want it to be up probably around 3, maybe a little over. What I would really like this thing to do is be able to run with a new Mustang GT. Run with a stock new one. So if on the street with novice drivers, 2 guys just out on a Sunday afternoon having a good time, and this car manages to not get left in the dust by a new GT, I'd be very pleased. That's where I'd like to be. And I think new GTs will run, we'll say with a novice driver on street tires, like 12.0, maybe 12.5, something like that. So this thing's got a ways to go, but I think it can get there and not be crazy doing it. But as far as power adder, one of the easiest things to do is a Pro Charger, or centrifugal supercharger anyway. And there ain't no way I'm gonna get a belt down there between that fan and that crank to run one. I've also considered turbocharging, but I really don't want to cut the car up to run an intercooler or anything. I've considered non-intercooled, just like 5 pounds of boost and just run it on E85. Don't know, that stuff's so far in the future it just doesn't even matter. But I think the only thing left of any interest in here is probably the headers. And like I said, those are stain-less, not stain-free headers. The garage this thing was in was basically damp for 10 years. It wasn't like wet, but it wasn't good. It's one of the few things that looks worse on camera than it truly is in reality. But those could be steel-wooled and polished back out if I wanted to. I really don't care. Those are also Percy's, I think, dead soft aluminum header gaskets, and they are fantastic. You want those. Those are ARP bolts. Those are also ARP 12-point Chevy bolts. That's a bad idea. Don't put 12 bolts on your Ford. You'll you'll never get them off. Guess how I learned that? I have a set of 6 points intended for Fords down in the basement in the box, ready to go. I have half an assumption that to get that header off, I may have to actually pull the head. To get it on, I had to grind a wrench, like a box end wrench, basically in half, and broke it just as it was getting tight. And I think I Loctite-redded those because I was dumb and just always heard about people having loose headers, and I didn't want loose headers. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but I don't want those cylinder heads anyway, so we'll see. And I guess one more thing of a small amount of consequence that I may or may not have added to my list of things to do to this thing, or my list of things that have been done to it. It has a firewall clutch adjuster now. These things run cable clutches. That's actually a cable that pulls on the clutch. It's not hydraulic. That is actually another problem I have with this car, or at least with driving it, is I have sciatic nerve problems in my left hip. And you may have noticed that everything I own is stick shift. Oh yeah, and did I say earlier I moved the seat back 2 inches? I built seat brackets to move the seat back because I am tall. So now full clutch pedal depression is a little bit of a long push. And the last time I drove this car, it was only, like I said, like a couple miles. And even getting at it then, it bothered me. My left leg has actually gotten much worse since the problem originally came up. They make hydraulic clutch conversion kits for these, and I think this one's going to get it. They're hideous. They look really ugly under the hood. They're also a nightmare to install. I think that you have to pull the transmission to do it, but I'm coming to the point where I either want to drive this car or I don't. So that may be something that needs done. And one last one that always gets people, because a lot of people don't know these exist. That's a Mr. Gasket Thermostat Cap. So it actually tells you what your coolant temperature is in your radiator. I think it's like 20 bucks. It's well worth the money. The dash gauges in these cars are fairly well known to be inaccurate. Speaking of, another problem with the car, the speedometer doesn't work. It reads like half and bounces around all over the place. I put new cable in it. I've had the gauge in and out of the dash a million times. In fact, right there, you can see all the fingerprints that are still there from the last time I had the dash out of this thing. Those fingerprints have been there for like 12 years. So I've been debating sending the cluster out and having it rebuilt, or just going to like a GPS speedometer, or doing something custom. I really like the look of the stock instruments. I don't want to put something in there that has like digital screens, because that just completely ruins the look of the car for me. I don't want to pretend this is not a car from really the 70s. This thing was designed in the 70s, but I don't want it to look like it's not from the 90s, because it is, and that's the experience that you get when you drive it. If I want screens, I'll go get a C5 or something newer. So that's super annoying. I may also just get one of those 8-pillar gauge kits and see about putting like a 2-inch speedometer in that and just drive this sumbitch and forget about the stock gauge, as long as I got one up on the screen. Using my phone as a GPS, or last time I drove this, GPS as a GPS is just a crap speedometer. It's just annoying. But that's another thing that needs addressed really before I habitually drive the car. Anyway, there's no possible chance this isn't going to be like an 1.5-hour video of me rambling and going over this thing and throwing pictures in of stuff I've done and talking about all the horrible things that have happened to me while I've owned this car and everything else. So I'm going to cut it off there. Now you guys know the car. If you have more questions about the car, drop them in the comments. I'm happy to answer. This is one of those cars that I've been intentionally holding back on, 1, because I don't have to work on it, and 2, because I think it should do well. One of my favorite channels and one of my inspirations for getting going, which would be Mr. Fuzzy Dice Projects, has a 91 Firebird that he's done a fair bit of work to, and that's everyone's favorite car on his channel. That would be something cool if the cars ever met up, being that they're both 91s and they both would have been arch rivals in their day. So anyway guys, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you for stopping in for this video. We'll catch you on the next one. I'm Max, that's Saddington Bear, and we make videos like this all the time. Here are a couple links to some other videos we've made, and we really appreciate you guys stopping in.